I had been hiking for hours. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and orange. I glanced at my watch. 7:45 p.m. It was too late to start thinking about turning back, but at the same time, I couldn't help feeling a slight tug of unease in the pit of my stomach. I was on a well-known trail, one I had hiked before, though this time I was alone. I had planned to reach a small campsite near a stream before dark, but as I trudged along, I realized I'd missed a few turns. Not by much, just a few feet here and there, but it was enough to make me lose track of where I was. The trail was starting to get unclear, just faint footmarks on the earth and the occasional fading sign nailed to a tree. As the sky darkened further, I debated turning back, but the thought of retracing my steps all the way to the trailhead didn't seem appealing. The light was fading fast, and I didn't want to get stuck hiking in the dark with no flashlight. So, I decided to press forward, telling myself I was close enough to the campsite that I could make it without too much trouble. The trees began to close in around me. The trail became a maze of roots and uneven ground. My boots kept catching on the underbrush, and the weight of my pack felt heavier with each step. The once easy trail was now challenging, but I kept pushing forward, thinking the campsite was just around the next bend. The dim light of dusk cast strange shadows, and I began to feel more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. I should have known better. I should have paid attention when I first noticed the trail was getting harder to follow. But I didn't. I told myself it was just part of the adventure, that I could handle it, that it was nothing to worry about. But the truth is, I was already lost, and I didn't realize it until it was too late. When the last trace of daylight vanished and the darkness settled over the forest, I knew I had made a mistake. I stood still, my breath coming in short gasps as I scanned the path in front of me. I could barely make out the outlines of trees, and the trail, what was left of it, was nearly impossible to see. My phone had no service, and my headlamp's batteries were running low. I turned it on, but the weak beam only illuminated a few feet in front of me, making the surroundings feel even more claustrophobic. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to decide what to do. Should I just sit and wait until morning? But I knew that wasn't an option. The temperature was already dropping, and the last thing I needed was to be stuck in the woods overnight, exposed to the elements with no shelter. The trail was nowhere to be seen, and the thought of wandering blindly in the dark made my stomach turn. But I couldn't just stand there either. My options were slim, and none of them seemed good. I began walking again, trying to keep calm. I told myself that it was still early enough that someone might be around. Maybe another hiker would come by, or a ranger would notice I was missing. But as the minutes turned into hours, I realized that wasn't going to happen. The woods were silent except for the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. I had no idea where I was, and the weight of that knowledge pressed heavily on me. The darkness felt oppressive. The air was thick with moisture, and I could hear my own breathing, loud in my ears. My legs were sore from the hours of hiking, and I had no idea how much further I had to go. The moon was barely visible, hidden behind thick clouds that seemed to gather faster as the night wore on. I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction, and the trail was all but invisible. I tried to use the stars as a guide, but the sky was overcast, and the moon offered no help. I felt the weight of isolation pressing down on me, and for the first time since I set out on this hike, I was truly scared. I stumbled through the dark, trying to keep my bearings, but the forest felt like it was closing in on me. The trees seemed to shift and move, casting long shadows that seemed to follow me wherever I went. Every rustle in the brush, every snap of a twig, made me jump. My mind was playing tricks on me, and I hated how easily it could twist reality into something terrifying. I couldn't help but think about all the things that could go wrong. What if I slipped and broke an ankle? What if I fell and couldn't get back up? I wasn't prepared for an emergency, not like this. I had a small first aid kit, but nothing to deal with anything serious. I didn't have enough water to last much longer either, and the idea of spending the night out here was starting to feel more and more like a real possibility. I pushed on, telling myself it was just a matter of time before I would find my way back to the trail or at least reach some open space where I could get my bearings. But the more I walked, the more it felt like I was going in circles. The wind picked up suddenly, and the trees above creaked and moaned as they swayed. I heard the sound of something moving nearby, and my heart skipped a beat. It was probably just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the sound was too close, too deliberate. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I paused, straining my ears to listen. The sound stopped. I took a few slow steps, trying to be as quiet as possible. And then I heard it again, a rustle followed by a snap. It wasn't close now, but it was still there, following me. I quickened my pace, but my steps were muffled by the thick underbrush. I didn't want to run, but the urge to get away from whatever was following me was becoming overwhelming. The woods felt like a maze, and I was lost in the center of it. I kept walking, trying to focus on keeping my breathing steady, but the fear was starting to take over. Every step felt heavier, as if the forest itself was trying to hold me in place. My thoughts raced. What if it was a predator? What if I wasn't the only one out here, and the one who had been following me had bad intentions? I needed to find shelter, fast. I looked around for anything I could use. A cave, a fallen tree, anything that could protect me from the night. But there was nothing, just trees and shadows. I finally stumbled upon a small clearing and, desperate, decided to make camp for the night. I wasn't prepared for this kind of situation, but I had no choice. I set up my tent as quickly as I could, fumbling with the poles and struggling to get everything in place. My hands were shaking, and I could feel the panic creeping back in. Once the tent was up, I crawled inside and tried to calm down. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could hear every sound outside the tent. The wind, the rustling leaves, the occasional snap of a twig. My flashlight flickered out, and I realized I had no backup batteries. The darkness outside the tent seemed to swallow everything, and I felt utterly alone. I lay there, trying to control my breathing. I had to stay calm. I had to wait for morning. The night felt like it would never end. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time didn't matter anymore. The fear was the only thing I could focus on. I heard sounds again, closer this time, footsteps, slow and deliberate. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I held my breath, hoping whatever it was would go away. And then it did. The footsteps stopped. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I gathered the courage to unzip the tent and peek outside. There was nothing, no figure, no sound, just the dark, empty forest. By some miracle, I made it through the night. When the first light of dawn began to break through the trees, I gathered my things and tried to make sense of where I was. I had no choice but to keep moving, even though my body was exhausted and my mind was still reeling from the terror of the night. I had no idea how I had ended up where I was. I wasn't on the trail anymore. I was deep in the woods, miles from where I had started. But eventually, after what felt like hours of walking, I heard a faint sound in the distance. A car. I pushed forward, praying it was the trailhead, praying I hadn't gotten even more lost. When I finally emerged from the trees and saw the parking lot ahead, I felt a rush of relief. My heart was still racing, but I had made it. I got into my car and started the engine, exhausted but grateful to be out of the woods. The fear I had felt the night before seemed to fade, but it left me with a lingering respect for how quickly things can go wrong when you're out there alone. I may have been lost, but at least I had found my way back. Two years ago, my brother and I went hiking in the Olympic Peninsula. We'd planned a week-long trip through the coastal trails, aiming to loop through some lesser-used backcountry routes. It was late September, right before the cold and wet season really kicked in. The place was mostly deserted, which we liked. We weren't new to this. Both of us had done multi-day treks before, including some remote stretches in the Cascades and parts of Idaho. But something about this trip still sticks with me. Not because of the scenery, not because of the terrain, but because of one night. One night I still think about when I'm lying in bed trying to fall asleep. We had been hiking for 3 days by then, cutting through damp, moss-covered forest and narrow ridge trails that wound high above the coastline. The woods out there are thick. You don't get wide-open views much, just endless trees, hanging moss, ferns that grow chest-high, and the constant sound of dripping water. Even in the middle of the day, the light struggles to get through. Everything feels soft underfoot. Matted pine needles, soaked dirt, and roots like veins crawling out of the ground. It smells like rot and salt and earth. It's beautiful, but it has weight to it. That evening, fog rolled in faster than we expected. We were used to Pacific Northwest fog, but this was different. It wasn't just low visibility, it was thick, wet, and fast, like someone poured concrete through the trees. You could see it sliding in, slow and heavy, swallowing tree trunks and muting sound. We were up on a narrow ridge then, maybe 20 feet wide, with steep drop-offs on either side and thick woods beyond that. It wasn't safe to keep hiking, not with how quickly it came in and how dark it was getting, so we decided to set up camp right there. We found a flat patch just off the main trail, maybe 15 feet in, where the trees opened up a little. The ground was wet but manageable. We pitched the tent, set up our bear hang, and had a quick dinner of freeze-dried meals and some jerky. We didn't talk much, just the usual rundown of how the day went, the miles we'd covered, and what to expect the next morning. By the time we turned in, the fog had fully settled. It pressed against the tent walls, making the air feel colder than it was. Everything outside the tent was quiet. Not just quiet, but dead. No wind, no rustling, no insects. Even the usual drip of water from the trees had stopped. It was like the whole forest had gone still. I didn't fall asleep right away. I remember lying there, just listening, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. My brother was out cold in a few minutes. He could sleep through anything. I lay there for a while, maybe an hour or two, staring at the roof of the tent and watching the shape of it shift slightly in the fog-diffused moonlight. Eventually, I must have dozed off. Then, around 3 a.m., something woke me up. A scream. It wasn't like anything I've ever heard in the wild, and I've heard a lot. I've heard foxes, owls, elk, even a bobcat once. This was different. It sounded almost human, but wrong. It was long, stretched out, like a woman screaming in pain, but there was no breath to it, no pauses. Just this warbled, echoing wail that came from deep in the woods and rolled through the trees like it was circling us. My brother sat bolt upright as soon as it happened. Neither of us said a word. We just stared at each other, listening. Then it stopped. Just cut off, no trail off, no fading. Just silence. I kept expecting some follow-up sound. Footsteps. Another cry. Maybe even branches breaking. But there was nothing. The forest was dead silent again. It was so quiet it felt wrong, like the world had been put on pause. My heart was pounding. I didn't move. My brother didn't move either. We just lay back down, stiff as boards, staring at the roof of the tent. About 30 minutes later, it came again. Closer. This time, it sounded like it was right at the edge of our camp, maybe 100 feet away, just beyond the trees. It was the same scream, long, broken, echoing, but more direct now, like it wasn't just floating through the trees but aimed at us. It felt deliberate, not like something was crying out into the wild, but like it wanted us to hear it. Then it went quiet again, and then we heard something brushing against the tent. It was slow, almost lazy. Something dragged across the nylon wall of the tent, right above our heads. It wasn't sharp or fast, no claws or slashing. It was soft, steady, like a hand or a paw with weight behind it. Just a slow, dragging movement from one end to the other. We held our breath. I remember holding mine so long my chest started to ache. Neither of us moved. There was no zipper sound, no flashlight flick. We didn't even whisper. We just lay there, frozen. Whatever it was didn't make another sound. No footsteps, no crunching of underbrush, no breathing. It didn't circle back. It didn't test the tent again. It just stopped. I don't know how long we stayed like that, staring at the roof of the tent, holding still like kids hiding under the blankets. Eventually, my body started to ache from the tension. Time got weird. Felt like hours passed, but it might have been less. All I know is that the fog never lifted, and the light never really came. The first sign of morning was just a slow, gray shift in the color of the tent fabric, like someone dimmed up a lamp behind it. We didn't say anything until we were out of our sleeping bags, until we were standing outside in the wet morning air. The fog was still there, but thinning now, peeling back between the trees like smoke. I walked the perimeter of the camp while my brother packed up inside the tent. I looked for prints, broken branches, anything, but there was nothing. No tracks, no fur, no scuff marks. The pine needles around the tent were undisturbed. I even checked the side of the tent where we'd heard the dragging sound. The nylon was damp with dew, but there was no sign of tearing or pressure. It was like nothing had happened, but something had. I've gone over it 100 times in my head. I've tried to explain it with animals. I know mountain lions can scream like a woman in distress. I've heard recordings, but this didn't sound like that. It was too long, too warbled, and there was no breath in it. A cougar's scream rises and falls. It has lungs behind it. This was flatter, like it wasn't coming from a chest at all. Just a warped sound, like it had been played through a broken speaker. And the dragging on the tent? That's not something a cougar does. If it was a curious animal, maybe a bear or a raccoon, there'd be prints. There'd be noise. There'd be signs. We packed up fast. No coffee, no breakfast. Just stuffed everything into our packs and got moving. We didn't talk about it. I think neither of us wanted to be the one to say it out loud. Not because we were scared to admit it happened, we both knew it did, but because naming it made it real, made it harder to leave behind. We hiked hard that day. No breaks, no side trails, just miles. We passed 2 other hikers late that afternoon, the only people we saw on the trail that day. I wanted to ask them if they'd heard anything weird the night before, but I didn't. I just nodded and kept walking. By the time we reached the trailhead the next evening, we were both exhausted, physically and mentally drained. I remember standing by the car, stretching out my legs, watching the fog creep along the tops of the distant trees, and feeling something in my gut settle. Not relax, just settle, like we'd crossed a line and made it back. I still think about that scream sometimes, especially when I'm alone in the woods or when fog starts moving in fast. It's not something I can explain away, not something I can laugh off. I don't tell people about it unless they've been out in the wild themselves and know what it feels like when something just doesn't add up. Maybe it was an animal we've never seen. Maybe it was a person with some kind of injury or mental break. Maybe it was some kind of sound distortion in the fog. But I've heard enough to know what normal sounds like out there. And that wasn't normal. Whatever it was, it knew we were there. It wanted us to hear it. And I think it wanted us to remember. And I do. I remember. We'd been hiking around the Escalante area in southern Utah for 3 days when it happened. My buddy Mark and I were trying to stay off the beaten path, sticking to old cattle trails and dry creek beds, anything that wasn't on a map. Escalante is already pretty remote, but we had gone even deeper, cutting off from Hole in the Rock road a couple days before and heading into canyons where barely anyone goes. No signal, no sounds but wind and maybe the distant scrape of a lizard on sandstone. That kind of quiet. It was late September, so the days were still hot, but nights were getting colder. We each had light packs, just enough food, a bit of water, sleeping bags, and our tents. We were filtering from little pools we'd find in the rocks, the ones that collect after summer storms. Our plan was to loop through a few slot canyons and maybe reach the Escalante River before heading back. The day it happened had been long. We started early that morning, climbing out of a narrow canyon where we'd camped the night before. It had been a tough climb, lots of loose rock and sun beating down. By the time we topped out onto a high mesa, the air had that dry shimmer to it, the way it gets in desert country when everything feels brittle. We took a long break under the only bit of shade we could find, a short, twisted juniper growing out of solid rock. That afternoon, we pushed across a wide plateau of sandstone domes, the kind that roll like frozen waves. Nothing but slick rock and sparse brush for miles. We didn't see anyone. We hadn't seen another human since the truck 2 days earlier. Not even a boot print. We were maybe an hour from sunset when we first saw the smoke. It was off in the distance, probably half a mile away, rising in a thin column into the still evening sky. It wasn't much, just a lazy curl of gray against the orange-pink of dusk, but it was enough to stop us both mid-step. At first, I figured someone else must have been hiking nearby, maybe another group that had come in from a different access point. But that was odd. We'd seen no signs of anyone, not even a cigarette butt or flattened grass. This area wasn't a popular spot, and we were way off any trail. The smoke came from a little dip between some rock outcroppings. Hard to say exactly where from that distance, but the terrain funneled us in that direction anyway. We talked about it briefly, just a couple muttered guesses while we adjusted our packs and kept walking. I remember thinking it was kind of a relief in a way. Maybe we weren't as alone out here as we thought. Maybe someone else had a GPS or a radio. If something went wrong, it'd be good to know someone else was within shouting distance. As we got closer, the smoke became more defined, and eventually, through the thinning light and the last glare of sun, we saw the fire. And the man. He was sitting on the ground with his back straight, facing the fire. No tent, no backpack, no gear. Just a man sitting maybe 2 feet from the flames, completely still. He was silhouetted by the fire, so we couldn't make out any features. Just the shape of his head and shoulders and arms resting on his knees. Mark and I stopped walking. We both saw him, and we both kind of gave each other that look. Like, what the hell? We stood there for a while, maybe 50 yards off, watching. I waved just a slow, casual wave. No response. Mark called out a simple, "Hey man!" Still nothing. The guy didn't move, didn't turn, didn't even twitch. Just kept sitting there, head tilted slightly downward, looking into the flames. I remember thinking maybe he couldn't hear us, or maybe he was asleep, but the fire was still burning strong, and the way he was sitting, perfectly upright, hands resting loose on his legs. It didn't look like he was dozing. It looked intentional, focused. We didn't want to mess with it. Whatever was going on, it didn't feel right. Could have been drugs. Could have been something worse. We gave it a wide berth, circling around and moving off another 1/4 mile or so. We made camp behind a rock ridge that blocked the view. But the light from his fire still flickered over the tops of the rocks. It was weird knowing he was so close, yet silent. That night, neither of us talked much. We cooked a bit of food on our camp stove and ate in silence. The stars were out, moon nearly full, sky clear as glass. I remember lying in my sleeping bag, the warmth of the meal barely lasting through the cold that had crept in. I kept glancing toward the firelight flickering through the trees. It burned steady, never flaring up or dying down. Just steady. I must have fallen asleep sometime after midnight, but something woke me up before dawn. Maybe 3 a.m. I was cold and had to pee. The kind of cold that stings your nose and makes your joints feel stiff before you even move. I sat up and looked toward the fire, still burning, but the man was gone. I remember that moment too clearly. The fire was there, same spot, same strength, but no silhouette, no sitting figure. Just the fire. I nudged Mark awake. He sat up, grumbling, but when he saw me looking toward the fire, he looked too. We didn't say anything, just stared. Eventually, I whispered, "He's gone." Mark nodded. We didn't go check right then. Maybe we should have, but something about it didn't feel right. We just went back into our bags. zipped them tight, and waited for sunrise. By morning, the fire was out. I expected to see smoke, steam, some sign of the night before, but there was nothing. We walked over after eating a bit of breakfast, and the spot where the fire had been, where the man had been, was just bare ground. No logs, no ash, no blackened stone or scorched dirt. Just smooth, undisturbed earth, like nothing had happened. We looked for footprints, drag marks, bits of burned wood. Nothing. The dirt wasn't even disturbed. No crushed grass, no bent branches, nothing out of place. We stood there for a long time, not saying anything, just looking. We both saw it. We both saw the fire. We both saw the man. And now it was all just gone. There's no real way to explain it. We didn't imagine it. We talked about it once or twice days later back in town, just enough to confirm we'd both seen the same thing. Then we stopped bringing it up. Not out of fear, just out of something else. Like our brains didn't want to dwell on it. I've thought about it a lot since. Tried to come up with a logical answer. Maybe the guy was a survivalist, someone who knew how to pack up and erase a campsite perfectly. Maybe the fire wasn't real, some kind of light trick. But it burned, flickered. It warmed the rocks around it. It was real, and he was too. I don't know why he was there. I don't know how he left no trace. And I don't know why he never moved, never looked at us, never said a word. But I know we saw him. I know we weren't alone out there. And sometimes, when I think back to that cold patch of ground, I wonder if he was watching us while we slept. Not from the fire, from somewhere else, somewhere darker. I haven't been back to that part of Utah since. It was late October when I set out on that hike in the Adirondacks. I'd been watching the weather for days, and while the temperatures had dropped, there was no snow in the forecast. At least, not according to the last service I got on my phone back in town. I knew the area well enough to understand that forecasts meant less and less the deeper you went. Mountains don't care about predictions. They do what they want. I figured I'd do 2 nights out, make a wide loop, and be back by Sunday night. Just a short break away from everything. The first day was fine. Cold, yeah, but clear. The trail was quiet. Only a few boot prints in the dirt that looked a day or 2 old. I didn't see anyone. Just trees thinning into bare limbs and patches of golden leaves that hadn't quite given up yet. The trail wound up and down over the ridgelines, crunching underfoot with frost. I took my time, ate lunch beside a small creek, and by sunset I was setting up my tent a mile or so past a trail junction I'd marked on the map. It was a good site, flat, slightly sheltered by pine, and not too close to the trail but not too deep into the woods either. That night, it dipped below freezing. I remember curling deep into my bag, pulling the drawstring tight around my head, and trying not to breathe too much cold air. I had my emergency candle in the tent with me, something I always pack just in case. You'd be amazed how much heat one of those little things gives off in a tight space like a tent. The next morning started normal enough. Frost on everything. I packed up quickly, hopping around to warm up my feet, and got moving. The trail climbed a little and then dropped sharply into a narrow valley. That's when the weather turned. Fast. I noticed the wind first. It came in strong bursts, pushing at my pack, rattling the branches above me. Then the sky went flat and gray. I remember thinking the clouds looked like steel. I pushed on, but within an hour, the first flakes started falling, big, wet ones. At first, it was kind of beautiful, quieting everything around me, but then it started piling up fast. The ground went from brown to white in maybe 30 minutes, and my boots were soaked before I knew it. Visibility dropped. I checked the map and realized I was still 2 miles from the shelter I had marked, an old lean-to that people used in emergencies. By the time I reached it, I was drenched. My gloves were wet. My hat was crusted with half-frozen snow. I just wanted to get dry and warm. The shelter stood a bit off the trail, up a small slope through some evergreens. It looked the same as I remembered, weathered wood, 3 sides, roof sloping back into the forest. But as I got closer, I saw something that stopped me cold. The opening, the front of the lean-to, was sealed. Chains. Heavy, rusted chains wrapped around steel posts set into the front beams. Thick links like you'd see securing a shipping container. And not just once around, but 3 or 4 times, crisscrossed like someone had really wanted to keep something out, or in. I stood there staring at it, snow piling on my shoulders, thinking maybe it had been condemned or damaged somehow. But this wasn't new. The chains had rust. Whoever did this didn't do it yesterday. I don't know what I expected. I guess I figured someone in the trail register would have mentioned it being locked up. But I hadn't seen a register since yesterday morning. The wind cut through my soaked layers. I didn't have time to wonder much more. I ducked down beside the shelter, where the roof sloped low over a patch of frozen ground. There was a bit of a crawl space under the overhang, just enough room to squeeze in. The wind still reached me, but it was better than being out in the open. I set my pad down, sat cross-legged, and lit the emergency candle in the shallow metal base I carry it in. I wrapped my rain poncho around my legs to keep what heat I could in. The candle's flame flickered, throwing soft orange light against the wood slats of the shelter beside me. I could see the gaps between them, just barely wide enough to glimpse the darkness inside. Night came fast, too fast. It always does in the cold. I ate a protein bar, drank some water, and tried to get comfortable. I kept thinking about the chains. Who locked a shelter like that? And why? But I was too cold and tired to really dwell on it. I drifted off, curled around the candle's tiny warmth. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but the candle had burned down halfway. The wind was still blowing hard outside. The snow hadn't let up. My face was numb, but that's not what woke me. It was a sound low, steady, and close. Scraping, not like an animal pawing or chewing. This was deliberate. Long drags, like claws or nails pulled slow across wood. It was coming from inside the shelter, just a few inches beyond the wall I was pressed against. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. There was no reason for anyone to be in there. It was locked tight. I checked every side when I first arrived.
No windows, no luose boards.
Just the heavy front chains and walls solid as ever. I thought maybe I was dreaming. Cold does weird things to your head. But then came the thump, a heavy one, like something dropped from waist height onto the floor inside, followed by a low creak, and then footsteps, dragging footsteps, not crisp like boots, not light like an animal, slow, uneven, something or someone moving across that wood floor. I wanted to call out to ask who was there, but my mouth wouldn't open. My breath came in short gasps. I don't know how long I sat like that, just listening. Every hair on my body was standing up. Then the footsteps stopped. Right against the wall beside me, there was silence, total silence, except for the wind and snow. I stayed frozen. The candle burned lower and lower. My legs had gone numb, and my fingers were stiff. I was too scared to shift or reach into my pack. I sat there for hours, wide-eyed, listening for more movement, but nothing came, just the occasional groan of the wind against the roof. When the sky started to lighten, I dared to move, just a little. I twisted, stretched my legs, and let blood return to my toes. My joints cracked loud enough to make me flinch. It was quiet inside, still dead quiet. Once the sun crept up fully, I crawled out from the lean-to's shadow and stood. The storm had eased, just flurries now. My gear was stiff with frost. I circled the shelter once more, still chained up, still no sign of forced entry. But I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Just under the slats on the back wall, there were marks, scratches, gouges really, deep ones, 4 of them,
Parallel.
like claws or tools raked into the wood from the inside. I leaned in and peered through one of the narrow gaps. The inside was bare, no sign of a person, No bag, no food wrappers, no animals. Just a pile of leaves in one corner and a patch of floorboards covered in frost. And right in the middle of the floor, a dark stain. Not blood, I don't think, but something old and soaked into the wood. Like something had been there a long time. I backed away. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just packed my gear and started walking. I didn't even check the map. I just went back the way I came. The snow had covered all my tracks from the day before. Took twice as long to find the way. My boots slipped, my legs cramped, and I fell more than once. But I didn't stop moving. Not until I was back at the trailhead. When I got to the parking lot, my car was the only one there.
No ranger vehicles.
No other hikers. Just rows of snow-dusted trees and a single pair of my boot prints leading away and now returning. I sat in the car for 20 minutes before starting the engine, just letting the heater run. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't grip the wheel right away. I went back home and didn't tell anyone about what I heard. Not right away. I just kept replaying it in my head. The scrape, the thump, the dragging steps, and the fact that the shelter was sealed. Not because it was unsafe structurally, but because someone wanted it closed. For good. A week later, I called the ranger station, just to ask. I said I'd passed by the shelter and noticed it was locked up. I didn't give my name. The guy on the phone paused a long time before answering. Then he said, "Yeah, that one's not in use anymore." "Why?" I asked. He paused again. "Old damage. Vandalism, mostly. Some folks had a bad night up there a few years back. We shut it down. That was it." That's all he said. I've hiked since then. A lot, actually. But I don't sleep near shelters anymore. I don't trust them. If I see one, I keep walking. Even in a storm. Even in the cold. I'd rather take my chances with a tarp and a shovel than spend another night listening to something moving around behind chained doors. Something no one wants to talk about. I still don't know what was in there that night. I've got ideas, sure, but they're not the kind I can say out loud without sounding like I've lost my mind. All I know is I saw the chains. I heard the sounds. I saw the claw marks. And whatever it wasn't trying to get out. It was waiting. I was hiking alone in the Ouachita Mountains last fall. It was early October. The trees were just starting to shift into their fall colors, reds and yellows edging out the green, and the nights were cool but not yet cold. The air had that clean, crisp bite that makes you breathe deeper. I had been planning the trip for a few weeks, nothing too crazy, just a 4-day out and back route I'd pieced together from a mix of park maps and some trail forums online. Everything was marked. Everything was clear. I'd even gone over satellite images and printed out backup directions, laminated them, and kept them in my pack with a compass and a backup GPS. This wasn't my first long solo hike, and I wasn't taking any chances. The first day was quiet and smooth. I started at dawn and followed the main trail deep into the mountains. I saw a couple of other hikers in the early hours, but by the time the sun was overhead, I was completely alone. That was what I liked most about these trips. Just the silence, the trees, the trail ahead, and the slow rhythm of walking. My boots were broken in, my pack was light enough, and I felt strong. I made camp before dark, off a small creek, cooked a simple meal, and slept well. Day 2 was more challenging. The trail climbed steadily most of the morning, cutting through thick pine and hardwood, and I had to stop a few times to adjust my pack and hydrate. Still, nothing felt wrong. I'd seen some deer, a couple of wild turkeys, and heard coyotes in the early morning, typical stuff for the region. The wind picked up a little in the afternoon, and I watched yellow leaves fall in small flurries whenever a gust passed through. That evening, I found a flat, cleared space about 50 yards off the trail to set up camp. I always keep my sight subtle and leave no trace. I pitched my tent under a tall oak, hung my food in a bear bag a ways off, and settled in as the sky darkened. I remember lying on my back, watching the stars come out one by one through the mesh of my tent. It was quiet, peaceful. I didn't feel anything strange. Not yet. The next morning, I packed up and hit the trail early, planning to loop around and backtrack halfway before heading back out on day 4. I was in good shape with my supplies. Plenty of water, a reliable filter, and more than enough food. Around midday, I passed a familiar-looking ridge I remembered from my route planning. That's when I saw it. Off to the right, just past a bend, there was a path I didn't recognize. It was narrow and half hidden by brush, but definitely a path. Curved into the trees in a way that didn't match any lines on my map. At first, I figured it had to be an old game trail or maybe a maintenance path that just wasn't documented. There were some faint signs of use, scuffed leaves, a broken branch here and there. Not fresh, but not abandoned either. I stood there for a minute, debating. It wasn't on my GPS or paper map, but it looked like it might cut across and reconnect further down the main trail. Maybe a shortcut or just something interesting to check out. I told myself I'd follow it for a few minutes, just a quick detour to see where it went. I had time. I wasn't in a rush. I stepped off the main trail and started down the side path. The canopy closed in quickly. It was darker, quieter. The wind I'd felt earlier seemed to disappear entirely. The path was tight, just wide enough for one person, and curved steadily downhill. I walked for about 10, maybe 15 minutes before I started to notice how still everything was. There were no birds.
No bugs.
Not even squirrels rustling in the trees. Just the sound of my boots crunching on dry leaves. Every step echoed in my ears. I stopped and turned around, intending to head back, but something was wrong. The path behind me wasn't there. I don't mean it looked different or was overgrown. I mean it was gone. There was nothing but brush and trees and undisturbed leaves. I stood frozen for a second, heart thudding, then took a few steps back, scanning the forest floor. No trail.
No scuff marks. No snapped branches.
I crouched down and looked for my own footprints. Nothing. I thought maybe I had gotten turned around, somehow looped and ended up off the path. I pulled out my compass, still facing the right direction. I tried retracing my steps carefully, looking for any hint of where I'd come from. After 10 minutes, I started circling out wider, hoping to cross the original trail again. I walked in slow spirals, marking trees with small sticks as I went, but everything looked the same. Just dense forest, thick undergrowth, and silence. I kept calm. I told myself this kind of thing happens. You get disoriented, you overthink, you panic. I checked the time. I still had several hours of daylight left. My GPS had no signal, but that was normal out here. I gave it some time, walking with the receiver out, hoping to catch a blip. Nothing. 2 hours later, I was still lost. The terrain had started to change. More rocks, steeper inclines. I felt like I was walking in a slow descent, which didn't match anything on the topography map I remembered. I tried to follow the ridgelines, thinking if I could gain some elevation, I might see something recognizable. But everything just looked like trees and more trees. It was late afternoon by then. The light had that gold tint that only lasts half an hour before dusk settles in. I found a small clearing and dropped my pack. I sat on a log, drank some water, and tried to think clearly. I wasn't in immediate danger. I had supplies, shelter, food. But I was off trail in unfamiliar woods, and the quiet was beginning to wear on me. That's when I heard the first twig snap. It was behind me, maybe 30 feet away. I stood up fast, turning toward the sound. Nothing moved. I waited, listening hard. A minute passed. Then I heard another crunch, this time off to the left. Not fast, not loud, just slow, deliberate steps. My heart was pounding now. I wasn't about to yell or make noise. I just stood there, bear spray in hand, eyes scanning the treeline. After a while, the sounds stopped. I didn't know if it was an animal or a person or just my nerves, but I didn't want to sleep out in the open anymore. I moved a few hundred yards deeper into a thicker patch of trees, set up my tent low and hidden between some large rocks and logs. I didn't cook. I didn't even eat. I just drank a little water and kept the spray beside me as I sat in the tent, back to the wall of stone, trying to stay quiet. All night I heard footsteps. They weren't constant, but every hour or so, I'd hear the crack of leaves or the soft thump of something moving in the brush. Not circling, not running, just moving nearby. Once, something brushed against the outside of my tent. Just once. I didn't sleep. I didn't even lie down. I sat there, knees tucked to my chest, listening, breathing slowly, forcing myself to stay still. When the sky finally started to lighten, I packed up fast. I didn't even roll the tent. I just stuffed it, still damp with dew, into my pack and started walking in the direction I thought the trail had to be. I picked a heading and stuck to it, checking my compass every few minutes. I figured if I kept a straight line, I'd either hit the main trail or one of the roads that crisscrossed through the park boundaries. It was risky, but staying put felt worse. After about 2 hours, I saw it. A blaze of orange paint on a tree, faded but there. Then another, and finally the trail itself. I stepped onto it like it was pavement. The shift in feeling was immediate. I could hear birds again. The wind was back, rustling the trees softly. I just stood there, breathing hard, trying to settle the adrenaline still buzzing in my chest. I didn't stop walking. I followed the trail straight out for the rest of the day, past the next few campsites I'd originally planned to hit. I reached the trailhead by sunset and got in my car without even changing out of my boots. I didn't feel safe until I hit the main highway and saw other cars. I've thought about that side path a lot since then. I even went back and looked at newer satellite images and trail maps. Nothing shows a trail in that area. Not even an old logging road or anything abandoned. I don't know if it was some kind of forgotten route or just a natural path that looked too much like a trail to ignore. Maybe I made a mistake walking off the main line. That's what I keep telling myself. But what haunts me isn't the fact that I got lost. It's how the forest changed the second I stepped off the real trail. The quiet wasn't normal. The way the trail disappeared behind me wasn't normal. And the footsteps that kept returning throughout the night without ever coming closer, without ever showing themselves, that still plays in my head. I've done a few hikes since then, always on established routes, always with someone else. I don't mess with side trails anymore. If it's not on the map, I don't follow it. I don't care how curious I am. Whatever that path was, it didn't want to be found. And I don't think I was supposed to walk it.